Those words saved 404 lives at 36,000 feet when United Flight 237's rudder jammed and every emergency procedure failed. While veteran pilots fought desperately to control a dying aircraft, a 12-year-old girl calmly announced she knew how to fix it. Her father had warned Boeing this would happen. They silenced him. But his daughter remembered everything. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Maya Harrison was 12 years old, and nobody on United Flight 237 paid any attention to her. She sat squeezed in seat 18D, the dreaded middle seat, between a businessman who'd fallen asleep the moment the plane took off and a woman who hadn't looked up from her tablet movie in 3 hours. Maya's dark brown hair hung in 2 simple braids down her back. She wore faded jeans with worn knees, a purple NASA hoodie that was 2 sizes too big, and white sneakers she'd covered with black Sharpie drawings of airplanes, Boeing 747s, 737s, and her favorite, the 777. In her lap sat a spiral notebook, its cover bent and torn from constant use. The pages inside were filled with technical sketches, turbofan engines with every blade carefully labeled, hydraulic systems with pressure values noted in the margins, flight control surfaces with mathematical calculations surrounding them. Behind her ear, she kept a mechanical pencil, the same kind her dad used to carry. To anyone glancing at her, Maya looked like a typical quiet kid on a long international flight. Maybe a little nerdy, maybe a little weird, nothing special. But Maya Harrison carried secrets that could save lives. At school, she was the strange girl who sat alone at lunch drawing airplane diagrams while other kids talked about video games. Her teachers didn't know what to do with her. She corrected their physics lessons. She pointed out errors in their math examples. She once spent an entire class explaining why the textbook's description of lift was oversimplified and technically inaccurate. The other students thought she was showing off. Her teachers thought she was difficult. Nobody understood that Maya wasn't trying to be smart. She just was. Because her father had taught her to be. And now her father was gone. United Flight 237, a Boeing 777-300ER, carried 404 souls, passengers and crew, from Seattle to London Heathrow. The massive aircraft cruised smoothly at 36,000 feet, somewhere over the remote Canadian Rockies. Below them, snow-capped mountains stretched endlessly. Above them, nothing but empty sky. Inside the cabin, most passengers slept with blankets pulled up to their chins. Some watched movies on their seatback screens. A few worked on laptops. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles, collecting trash and offering drinks. Everything was normal. Everything was peaceful. Maya sketched a detailed cross-section of a turbofan engine in her notebook, carefully labeling each component, the fan blades, the low-pressure compressor, the high-pressure compressor, the combustion chamber, the turbine section. She knew every part by heart. She could explain how each one worked, what could go wrong, and how to fix it. Her father had made sure of that. Thomas Harrison hadn't been just Maya's father. He'd been her teacher, her mentor, her best friend, her hero. While other kids spent afternoons at soccer practice or dance class, Maya spent hers at the Boeing factory in Everett, Washington, the largest building by volume in the world, where they assembled 747s, 767s, 777s, and 787s. Her dad worked there as chief hydraulic systems engineer for the 777 program. He designed the complex network of pumps, valves, and actuators that controlled the aircraft's flight surfaces, the ailerons that made it roll, the elevators that made it pitch, and most importantly, the rudder that made it yaw. Maya remembered one particular afternoon 2 years ago. She'd been 10 years old, small enough to crawl into spaces where adult engineers couldn't reach, curious enough to ask questions that made her dad smile. "Maya, come here. I need to show you something important." Her father stood beside a partially assembled 777, its tail section exposed like a patient in surgery. He held a clipboard covered in technical drawings and a flashlight to illuminate the dark recesses of the aircraft's anatomy. He pointed to a cylindrical metal component, about the size of a coffee can, nestled among a maze of hydraulic lines. "This is the hydraulic power control module," he explained, his voice carrying that tone he used when teaching her something crucial. "It controls the lower rudder. When the pilot pushes the rudder pedals, hydraulic fluid flows through this module, and it moves the rudder surface. That's how the plane turns in the air." Maya pulled out her ever-present notebook and started sketching, her hand moving quickly to capture the details. "But you built in redundancy, right?" she asked. "Backup systems in case something breaks?" Her father's expression changed. The smile faded. He glanced around the hangar, checking if anyone was listening, then knelt down to her eye level. "I did," he said quietly. "The upper rudder and lower rudder operate independently. If one fails, the other takes over. Triple redundancy. It should be foolproof." He paused, and Maya saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "But Maya, there's a flaw. A serious one." "What kind of flaw?" Her father pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, a technical drawing covered in his distinctive handwriting, red circles highlighting specific components. "The lower rudder module has a structural weakness. Right here." He pointed to a spot on the drawing, the end cap of the hydraulic cylinder. "The material tolerances are too tight. Under certain conditions, high flight cycle counts, thermal fatigue from repeated heating and cooling, metal stress from pressure variations, this end cap can develop microfractures." Maya's 10-year-old brain processed the information. "And if it fractures?" "The rudder jams. Usually in a deflected position. The pilot loses yaw control. Depending on the severity, the aircraft could become nearly uncontrollable." "That sounds really dangerous, Dad. Did you tell Boeing?" Thomas Harrison's jaw tightened. "I've filed 6 separate reports over the past 2 years. Detailed engineering analyses, computer simulations, stress test data. Everything documented." "What did they say?" "They ran probability calculations. They determined the mean time before failure would be approximately 28,000 years of continuous operation. They classified it as a statistical impossibility. They said the risk was acceptable." "But you don't think it's impossible?" "No, Maya. I think their calculations are based on flawed assumptions. I think they're underestimating the thermal stress cycles. I think this failure could happen much sooner, maybe in 20 years, maybe in 10, maybe in 5. I don't know exactly when, but I know it will happen." He looked at her seriously. "I pushed back. I argued. I showed them alternative scenarios. But fixing this would require recalling aircraft, modifying hundreds of hydraulic modules, compensating airlines for downtime. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars and massive delays to the production schedule." "So they said no?" "They said the risk was acceptable. That's what corporations do, Maya. They weigh the cost of fixing a problem against the probability of it occurring. And if the math says the problem is unlikely enough, they accept the risk." Maya felt anger rising in her chest, a childish sense of injustice. "But that's wrong. If there's any chance people could die." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Her father looked tired, defeated. "That's why I did something that could get me fired." He unfolded the paper completely, revealing a complex schematic filled with valve diagrams, pressure flow charts, and step-by-step procedures. "I designed a workaround. An emergency procedure. If the lower rudder ever jams, there's a way to isolate the failed module and reroute hydraulic pressure through the auxiliary pump override system to the upper rudder. It bypasses the damaged component entirely and gives the pilot single system control, degraded, but flyable." Maya studied the drawing, her mind absorbing every detail. "Why isn't this in the pilot's emergency manual?" "Because I submitted it for approval, and Boeing rejected it. Their reasoning? Since the failure is statistically impossible, there's no need for an emergency procedure. Publishing this workaround would be an admission that the flaw exists. It would open them to liability. So nobody knows about this except you. Just me, and now you. He handed her the folded blueprint. Keep this safe, Maya. Hide it. Don't show it to anyone. Why are you giving this to me? Her father touched her cheek gently. Because if I keep pushing this issue, I might not be around much longer. Boeing has a lot of money and a lot of lawyers. People who threaten their bottom line have a way of disappearing from the conversation. Dad, that sounds like a conspiracy theory. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm being paranoid. He smiled sadly. But I need someone to know the truth. Someone who understands the engineering, someone who could use this information if the worst ever happens. You think they'd hurt you? I don't know, Maya. But I know corporations have done terrible things when billions of dollars are at stake. I just want to make sure that if this flaw ever manifests, if a plane ever experiences this failure, someone out there knows how to fix it. Maya folded the blueprint carefully and tucked it into her backpack, next to her notebooks and pencils. I'll keep it safe, Dad. I promise. 3 months later, Thomas Harrison died. The official report from the Washington State Police said, single vehicle accident. Brake failure. Driver lost control on wet roadway. Vehicle struck tree at high speed. Death instantaneous. Maya and her mother attended the funeral. Hundreds of Boeing engineers came. They said wonderful things about her father. What a brilliant mind. What a dedicated professional. What a tragic loss. Maya didn't cry during the service. She stood silent, watching them, wondering if any of them knew the truth. After the funeral, she went to her father's home office, the room her mother hadn't touched since his death. She found his laptop hidden in a locked drawer. Her father had taught her about computers too. It took her 20 minutes to crack the password. Inside, she found encrypted folders. Another 10 minutes to decrypt them using techniques her dad had shown her for educational purposes. What she found made her blood run cold. Emails, dozens of them. Her father writing to Boeing executives with increasing desperation. The hydraulic module flaw is more serious than your risk assessment suggests. I'm requesting an emergency engineering review of part number 65-43201-7. My calculations show a significant probability of failure within the operational lifetime of current aircraft. I cannot in good conscience remain silent while this safety issue goes unaddressed. And the responses from Boeing management, all variations of the same message. Your concerns have been reviewed by our safety board. The risk remains classified as acceptable. We appreciate your diligence, but this matter is closed. Further discussion of this issue is not productive and may violate your confidentiality agreement. Then, 2 weeks before his death, her father sent a final email to 3 senior executives. I've been patient. I've followed protocols. I've given you every opportunity to address this issue internally. But I can no longer participate in this cover-up. If Boeing does not issue a service bulletin regarding the lower rudder hydraulic module flaw within 30 days, I'm taking this information to the FAA. I'm going public. I have documentation, test data, and probability analyses that will demonstrate negligence. This will kill someone, and I won't have that blood on my hands. The response came from Boeing's legal department. Dr. Harrison, we advise you to reconsider your position. Making unsubstantiated safety claims could constitute defamation and breach of contract. We strongly recommend you speak with your attorney before taking any further action. The last email her father sent was dated 1 day before the accident. I've made my decision. I'm contacting the FAA tomorrow morning. I'm sorry it came to this. The next day, his brakes failed. Maya sat in her father's office chair, staring at the screen, 12 years old and suddenly understanding the world in a way most adults never do. Her father hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered. She couldn't prove it. Not in a way that would hold up in court. But she knew it in her bones, in her heart, in the same logical mind her father had trained. Brake lines don't just fail on well-maintained cars. Not on a car belonging to a meticulous engineer who checked his fluids every weekend. Boeing had killed her father to protect their profits. And the flaw, the terrible, deadly flaw he tried to warn them about, was still out there. In every 777-in hundreds of aircraft flying thousands of flights every day. Waiting. Maya made two decisions that day. First, she would keep her father's blueprint with her always. In her backpack. Close to her heart. Second, she would become an engineer. Not just any engineer, the best engineer. Better than her father. Good enough to finish what he'd started. Good enough to keep the promise he couldn't keep. 4 hours into Flight 237, Maya was deep in concentration on her turbofan sketch when the world went wrong. The aircraft lurched violently to the left. Not a gentle bank. Not turbulence. A violent, sudden yaw that sent unsecured objects flying. Overhead bins popped open. A carry-on bag tumbled out and hit the aisle floor. Drinks spilled. Passengers screamed. The businessman next to Maya jolted awake with a shout. The woman on the other side dropped her tablet. Maya's mechanical pencil rolled off her lap and disappeared under the seat in front. But she didn't reach for it. She sat perfectly still, every sense focused on the aircraft around her. The sound, the vibration through the fuselage, the angle of the bank. The way the engine's pitch changed. She'd felt this before. In the Boeing training simulators her father used to sneak her into on weekends. He'd run failure scenarios, showing her what different malfunctions felt like through the airframe. Engine failure felt like a sudden loss of power and a yaw toward the dead engine. Hydraulic failure felt like sluggish controls and oscillation. This felt like a control surface jamming in a deflected position. The plane leveled out somewhat, but it was wrong. Everything was wrong. The aircraft shuddered constantly. The engine sounded asymmetric, one louder than the other, compensating. Even the air pressure in the cabin felt different, like the plane was fighting itself. Over the intercom, the captain's voice came on. She was clearly trying to sound calm and professional, but Maya could hear the tension underneath, the tightness in her throat, the slightly too fast cadence. Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced a flight control issue. We're working to resolve it. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please take your seats immediately. The cabin erupted in nervous chatter. Parents pulled children closer. People gripped armrests. Some pulled out phones to text loved ones, even though they had no signal over the mountains. Flight attendants rushed toward the front of the cabin, their faces professionally composed but their eyes showing fear. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Sit down, honey," the woman next to her said, grabbing Maya's arm. "Didn't you hear the captain? There's something wrong with the plane." "I know. That's why I need to talk to the pilots." "You're a child. Sit down." Maya pulled her arm free. "I know what's wrong with this plane. And I know how to fix it." "That's ridiculous. You're 12 years old." But Maya was already moving, small and quick, slipping between seats as panicking passengers tried to retrieve belongings from overhead bins against the flight attendant's instructions. She made it halfway up the aisle before a flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah Chen according to her name tag, intercepted her. "Sweetie, you need to return to your seat right now. I need to talk to the pilots." "That's not possible. Please go back to your seat." "The lower rudder is jammed," Maya said firmly, looking Sarah directly in the eyes. "Hydraulic power control module failure, probably end cap fracture on part number 65-43201-7. The pilots are using differential thrust and aileron to compensate, but Captain Torres won't be able to maintain that physically for more than another 20 minutes. After that, the aircraft will become uncontrollable. Sarah Chin stared at this 12-year-old girl who'd just spoken a sentence containing more technical aviation terminology than Sarah had heard in her entire 2 years of flight attendant training. Who are you? My name is Maya Harrison. My father was Dr. Thomas Harrison, Chief Hydraulic Systems Engineer for Boeing's 777 program. He designed this aircraft's rudder control system. And before he died, he predicted this exact failure would happen someday. Sarah's professional composure cracked. You're serious. 404 people are going to die if I don't talk to the pilots in the next few minutes. Please. Sarah made a decision. Come with me. Inside the cockpit, Captain Rebecca Torres was experiencing the longest 4 minutes of her 28-year flying career. She'd accumulated over 12,000 flight hours. She'd flown through typhoons in Southeast Asia, handled engine failures over the Atlantic, performed emergency landings with blown tires, even survived a bird strike that shattered her windscreen at 3,000 feet. But she had never, not once in all those hours, experienced anything like this. Hydraulic pressure is normal across all 3 systems, First Officer David Kim shouted, his eyes scanning instruments frantically. But the lower rudder is jammed hard left at 22 degrees deflection. It's not responding to any inputs. Torres was pulling the control yoke with both hands, her arms straining, muscles burning. This is impossible. The 777 has triple redundant hydraulic systems. We have 2 rudder surfaces with independent control. This failure mode isn't supposed to exist. The aircraft was essentially skidding through the air. The nose pointed slightly to the right while the tail dragged left, creating enormous aerodynamic drag. Torres was using full right aileron, banking the wings to counteract the yaw, and running the right engine at 95%. Thrust while pulling back the left engine to 70%. The asymmetric thrust created a yawing moment that partially compensated for the jammed rudder. It was like trying to drive a car while someone held the steering wheel permanently turned to one side. You could compensate by leaning on the gas pedal and fighting the wheel, but the moment you relaxed, you'd spin out of control. How long can you hold this? Kim asked. Torres's arms trembled. Maybe 15 minutes, maybe less. My muscles are already cramping. What happens when you can't hold it anymore? We lose yaw control. The aircraft enters an unrecoverable spin. We hit the mountains at 400 knots. Kim pulled up the emergency checklist on his display screen, fingers flying across the controls. There has to be a procedure for this. There has to be. He scrolled through the index. Rudder system malfunction. Hydraulic failure, flight control degradation. He read through every checklist. None of them applied. None of them described a scenario where the rudder jammed with normal hydraulic pressure. Because according to Boeing's engineering specifications, this scenario was impossible. There's no procedure, Captain. This malfunction isn't in the system. Torres fought the controls, sweat dripping into her eyes. Then we improvise. Alert Calgary. Tell them we're declaring an emergency and we need every piece of foam and emergency equipment they have. We're going to try to land this thing. Land, with a jammed rudder and no procedure. You have a better idea? Kim reached for the radio, but before he could transmit, the cockpit door burst open. Flight attendant Sarah Chen stood there, face pale, breathing hard. Captain, there's a 12-year-old girl here who says she knows what's wrong with the aircraft. Not now. Torres snapped, pulling harder on the yoke as the aircraft yawed left again. Get her back to her seat. Everyone needs to be secured. Captain, she's asking about the hydraulic power control module. By part number. She says her father designed this plane's rudder system. Torres and Kim exchanged glances. The aircraft shuddered violently. An alarm sounded, autopilot disconnect warning. The plane had become too unstable for the computer to control. Torres made a split-second decision. Send her in. Now. Maya Harrison stepped into the cockpit. She was so small she could barely see over the center console. But her eyes went immediately to the instrument displays, scanning them with practiced familiarity. She'd been in 777 cockpits before. Dozens of times. Her father used to bring her here during maintenance sessions, letting her sit in the captain's seat, explaining every switch, every gauge, every system. Her eyes found the rudder position indicator. Deflected 22 degrees left. Not responding to inputs. She looked at the hydraulic system display. All three systems showing normal pressure, green indicators across the board. Rudder jammed. Hydraulics normal. Exactly what her father had predicted. You have a lower rudder hardover, Maya said calmly, her voice small but steady. Hydraulic power control module end cap fracture. Part number 65-43201-7. The end cap has failed due to thermal fatigue and metal stress. The rudder actuator is jammed in the deflected position even though hydraulic pressure is normal. Captain Torres stared at this child speaking fluent aerospace engineering. Who the hell are you? My name is Maya Harrison. My father was Dr. Thomas Harrison, Boeing Chief Hydraulic Systems Engineer for the 777 program. He designed this aircraft's rudder control system. First Officer Kim's eyes went wide with recognition. Thomas Harrison. I read about him. He wrote the technical manual I studied in flight school. He was a legend in the industry. But I thought he died 18 months ago, Maya said quietly. Car accident. Brake failure. Torres was still fighting the controls, but her attention was on Maya. Kid, I'm sorry about your father. But we don't have time for. Before he died, he predicted this exact failure, Maya interrupted. He warned Boeing it could happen. He submitted 6 engineering reports showing the lower rudder module had a design flaw. Boeing rejected his findings. They said the probability of failure was statistically impossible, 28,000 years mean time before failure. Apparently they were wrong, Kim said grimly. Their calculations were based on flawed assumptions, Maya continued. They underestimated the thermal stress cycles. My dad's calculations predicted failure could occur within 10 to 20 years on high-utilization aircraft. Torres's arms were shaking now. Maya, this is all very interesting, but unless you can tell me how to fix this, we're going to crash in about 10 minutes when my arms give out. Maya pulled her backpack around and unzipped it. From inside, she extracted a folded piece of paper, worn and creased from 18 months of constant carrying. She unfolded it on the center console. It was a hand-drawn blueprint covered in technical diagrams and her father's distinctive handwriting. Red ink highlighted critical components. Arrows showed hydraulic flow paths. Margin notes explained procedures. There's a workaround, Maya said. It's not in your emergency manual because Boeing never approved it. But my father designed it for exactly this scenario. Kim leaned over to look at the blueprint. His eyes widened. This is incredibly detailed. But I've never seen this in any Boeing documentation. Because they buried it, Maya said, and for the first time, her voice hardened with anger. My father submitted this emergency procedure along with his safety reports. Boeing's safety board rejected it. Their reasoning was that since the failure was impossible, there was no need for a procedure to fix it. Publishing this workaround would be an admission that the flaw existed. Which would expose them to liability, Torres said, understanding immediately. My father tried to go public. He was going to contact the FAA. The day before his scheduled meeting with federal investigators, his brakes failed. The implications hung in the air. Kim looked like he might be sick. Torres made her decision. What do we need to do? Maya pointed to the blueprint. The lower rudder actuator is jammed because the failed end cap has allowed hydraulic pressure to become trapped on one side of the piston. You can't release the pressure through normal means because the control valve is downstream from the failure. So how do we fix it? You isolate the failed module by closing valve HC7 in the aft equipment bay. That cuts off hydraulic flow to the lower rudder completely. Then you reroute pressure through the auxiliary pump override system to the upper rudder. The upper rudder takes the full control load. Will the upper rudder alone give us enough control authority to land? Torres asked. Yes, but with degraded performance. You'll need to fly 20 knots faster than normal approach speed to maintain control authority. Your landing will need to be steeper, about a 4-degree glide slope instead of 3. And you won't have rudder authority for a crosswind landing, so you'll need calm conditions. Kim studied the blueprint more carefully. This is brilliant. The engineering is sound. But Captain, she's 12 years old. We're trusting 404 lives to a child's hand-drawn diagram. Maya looked Captain Torres directly in the eyes. No fear. No hesitation. My father spent 20 years designing this aircraft. I spent my entire childhood learning from him. I've been inside 777 since I was 6 years old. I know this system better than anyone alive. And right now, I'm the only person on Earth who knows how to save this airplane. The aircraft lurched again. Torres's right arm cramped so badly she cried out in pain. We're out of options, Torres said through gritted teeth. David, get to the aft equipment bay. Maya, talk him through it. First Officer David Kim grabbed a portable radio and Maya's blueprint and headed toward the rear of the aircraft. Behind him, Captain Torres broadcast to the cabin, "Flight attendants, I need complete cooperation from all passengers. Everyone must remain seated. We're executing an emergency procedure." In the cabin, passengers sensed the seriousness. The chatter died down. Parents held children. Some people prayed. Kim pushed through to the aft galley, where 2 flight attendants stood looking terrified. "I need access to the floor hatch," Kim said. They moved aside. He pulled up the galley carpet, revealing a metal hatch secured with quick-release latches. Maya's voice came over his radio, calm and clear. "Mr. Kim, when you open the hatch, you'll see a ladder going down into the aft equipment bay. It's a tight space, you'll have to crawl. Take a flashlight." Kim grabbed a flashlight from the emergency equipment locker, popped the hatch, and descended into the cramped mechanical space beneath the cabin floor. The equipment bay was a claustrophobic maze of hydraulic lines, electrical conduits, and mechanical systems. Everything vibrated with the plane's motion. The air smelled like hydraulic fluid and hot metal. "I'm in the bay," Kim said into the radio. In the cockpit, Maya had taken the first officer's seat. She held the radio in one hand and her father's blueprint in the other. "Okay, look for the hydraulic manifold. It's a series of colored pipes running along the port side of the fuselage. The pipes are color-coded, red, yellow, blue for the 3 hydraulic systems." Kim swept his flashlight across the cramped space. "I see it. Multiple pipes, color-coded. Follow the red pipe, that's hydraulic system 1. About 3 feet aft from where you are, you should see a junction point with several valves." Kim crawled forward, bumping his head on a conduit. "Found it. I count 6 valves on the manifold. You want the red-handled valve, 3rd from the left on the lower manifold. That's valve HC7. Kim positioned himself, flashlight in his mouth, and examined the valves. "Red handle, 3rd from left. Got it. That valve isolates the lower rudder actuator from hydraulic system 1. Right now it's open, which means hydraulic pressure is trapped in the jammed actuator. You need to close it fully, 90 degrees clockwise." Kim wrapped both hands around the valve handle. It was stiff. These valves weren't meant to be operated manually during flight. "It's stuck. Use your body weight." The valve hasn't been moved in years. It'll break free. Kim braced his feet against a support beam and pulled with everything he had. The valve didn't move. He adjusted his grip, took a breath, and pulled again, muscles straining. This time, the valve shifted slightly with a metallic screech. It's moving. Keep going. 90 degrees clockwise until it stops. Kim pulled steadily. The valve rotated slowly, fighting him every inch of the way. Sweat dripped into his eyes. Finally, with a solid clunk, the valve rotated to its stop position. Valve closed. In the cockpit, Torres felt a subtle change in the controls. Rudder pressure dropped. It still jammed, but something changed. Good, Maya said into the radio. The lower rudder is now completely isolated. It's still deflected, but it's no longer receiving hydraulic pressure. That means when we activate the override system, all the pressure will go to the upper rudder. What's next? Kim asked. Above the valve you just closed, you should see a pump assembly with yellow and black hazard stripes. It's labeled AUXHYD override on a metal tag. Kim looked up. There it was, right above him, a compact pump assembly with hazard striping and a red safety cover protecting the activation switch. I see it. That's the auxiliary hydraulic pump override. It's normally used only for ground maintenance. When you activate it, it creates a direct hydraulic path from the primary pump to the upper rudder, bypassing all the normal control valves. Will it provide enough pressure? Yes. The auxiliary pump can generate 3000 psi, more than enough for full rudder authority. My dad designed it as a backup to the backup. Boeing never intended it for in-flight use, but it'll work. What do I do? Flip up the red safety cover. Underneath you'll find a push-button switch. Press it and hold for 3 seconds, then release. The pump will activate automatically and stay running. Kim reached up and flipped the safety cover. Underneath was a black push-button switch with a yellow indicator light above it, currently dark. Safety cover up. I see the button. Press and hold for 3 seconds. Kim pressed the button. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, deep in the bowels of the aircraft, the auxiliary hydraulic pump roared to life. The yellow indicator light turned green. A whirring sound filled the equipment bay, the sound of high-pressure hydraulic fluid being forced through new pathways. In the cockpit, Torres felt the rudder pedals come alive under her feet. I have rudder control, she shouted. Partial, but I have it. She tested the pedals gently. The response was sluggish, nothing like the crisp authority of a healthy system, but the upper rudder surface responded. She reduced the asymmetric thrust on the engines. The aircraft steadied. The constant vibration stopped. The skidding motion ceased. The plane flew smoothly for the first time in 8 terrifying minutes. It's working, Torres said, her voice thick with emotion. Maya, it's actually working. Maya's voice came over the radio, small but proud. The upper rudder is carrying the full control load now. It's going to feel heavy and slow to respond because you're using a single surface to do the work of 2. You'll need to fly 20 knots faster than normal approach speed, that's about 165 knots for this aircraft weight. The extra speed will give you better rudder authority. What about landing? Your approach needs to be steeper than normal. About a 4-degree glide slope instead of the standard 3 degrees. The increased speed and steeper approach will compensate for the reduced control authority. Also, you can't handle crosswinds. You need calm wind conditions for landing. Kim crawled back toward the ladder, his job done. Captain, I'm heading back to the cockpit. Torres was already running calculations. Maya, nearest airport with suitable conditions. Maya looked at the navigation display. Calgary International. About 45 minutes at current speed. They have 3 parallel runways. According to the ATIS, wind is light and variable, visibility unlimited. Perfect. Torres keyed the radio. Calgary Center, United 237 declaring emergency. We've experienced rudder malfunction and need priority landing. Requesting runway 16 at Calgary International, and we need the fire equipment ready. United 237, Calgary Center, roger your emergency. You're cleared direct Calgary, expect runway 16. Emergency equipment will be standing by. What is the nature of your emergency? Jammed lower rudder, partial control only. We'll need a calm wind landing. Understand jammed rudder. Wind currently 040 at 5 knots. We can delay other traffic to give you optimal wind conditions. Souls on board and fuel remaining. 404 souls, approximately 12,000 pounds fuel. Copy that, United 237. You're number 1 for all runways. Descend and maintain flight level 250. As Torres began the descent, Maya unbuckled from the first officer's seat and started to head back to the cabin. Where are you going? Torres asked. Back to my seat. You don't need me anymore. Like hell you're leaving. You stay right here until we're on the ground. If anything else goes wrong, you're the only person who knows how to fix it. Maya hesitated, then nodded and sat back down. Kim returned to the cockpit, breathing hard, his uniform soaked with sweat. He reclaimed his seat and took control of the radio communications while Torres focused on hand-flying the wounded aircraft. That was incredible, Kim said, looking at Maya with newfound respect. How old did you say you were? 12. 12 years old, and you just saved 404 lives. Maya shook her head. My dad saved them. I just remembered what he taught me. The descent toward Calgary felt like it took days, though the clock showed only 45 minutes. Captain Torres hand flew every second of it. No autopilot. The wounded aircraft responded sluggishly to every input, requiring constant attention and correction. Maya stayed in the cockpit, monitoring the hydraulic systems, watching for any signs of further degradation. At one point, the upper rudder actuator temperature began climbing. The single surface was working overtime, generating more heat than normal. Temperature rising on the upper actuator, Maya noted. It's at 190 degrees Celsius. Is that a problem? Torres asked. The maximum operating temperature is 220. You're okay, but don't make any aggressive maneuvers. The actuator is under more stress than it was designed for. Don't worry. I'm treating this plane like it's made of crystal. Below them, the Canadian Rockies gave way to foothills, then prairie. The city of Calgary appeared on the horizon, a cluster of tall buildings surrounded by sprawl. Calgary Tower cleared all other aircraft from the airspace. United 237 had the sky to itself. Fire trucks lined the runway, their lights flashing red and white. Ambulances stood ready. Foam trucks were positioned at intervals. Inside the cabin, flight attendants prepared passengers for emergency landing procedures. Place your head between your knees. Grab your ankles. When we tell you, assume the brace position and hold it until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. Passengers followed instructions with grim determination. Some cried quietly. Others held hands with strangers. Parents whispered reassurances to frightened children. In seat 18D, the businessman who'd been sleeping when the crisis began asked the woman with the tablet, "Did you see that girl who went to the cockpit? The kid in the NASA hoodie?" "Yeah." "What was that about?" "I don't know. But she knew something. She was talking about hydraulics and part numbers like she worked for Boeing. They didn't know the half of it." 10 miles from Calgary International Airport. Captain Torres had the runway in sight. A long strip of concrete stretching ahead, looking impossibly narrow from this altitude. United 237, you're cleared to land runway 16. Wind 040 at 4 knots. Emergency equipment is standing by. Cleared to land, 16, Torres acknowledged. She configured the aircraft for landing. Flaps extended. Gear down, 3 green lights confirming all landing gear locked in position. But instead of the normal approach speed of 145 knots, Torres kept the aircraft at 165 knots, just like Maya had instructed. The extra speed made the plane more stable, gave the upper rudder more authority over the airflow. 500 feet, Kim called out, reading the altitude. 400.300. Maya whispered to herself, "Come on, Dad. Your design has to work. Please let it work." 200 feet. Torres had both hands on the yoke, feet delicately working the rudder pedals, managing the sluggish response. 100 feet. The runway rushed up to meet them. 50 feet. Torres began the flare, pulling back on the yoke to raise the nose, bleeding off speed. The main landing gear kissed the concrete, firm contact, but controlled. The nose gear came down. "Thrust reversers," Torres commanded. Kim deployed them. The reverser doors on the engines opened, redirecting thrust forward, slowing the massive aircraft. Speed brakes. The wing panels rose, killing lift, settling the aircraft firmly on the runway. Torres applied brakes, gently, evenly, not wanting to risk any asymmetric braking that might create a yaw moment the damaged rudder couldn't counter. The plane decelerated. 100 knots. 80 knots. 60 knots. 40 knots. 20 knots. And finally, smoothly, it rolled to a stop on the centerline. For a moment, the cockpit was silent. Then Captain Torres keyed the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Calgary." The cabin erupted in applause, tears, shouts of relief. Passengers hugged each other. Flight attendants cried openly. The businessman in 18C who'd slept through the beginning of the crisis and then witnessed the emergency landing broke down sobbing with relief. In the cockpit, First Officer Kim was laughing and crying at the same time. "We're alive. Oh my God, we're actually alive." Captain Torres sat back in her seat, arms trembling from 45 minutes of constant manual flying, and looked at Maya Harrison. The 12-year-old girl sat quietly, tears streaming down her face, clutching her father's blueprint. "Maya," Torres said softly. Maya looked up. "Your father would be so proud of you." Maya's voice cracked. "We did it, Dad. Just like you said we could." Within 2 hours, NTSB investigators descended on the aircraft like ants on spilled sugar. They photographed everything. Measured everything, documented every detail. When they removed the lower rudder hydraulic actuator, they found exactly what Maya had predicted. The end cap had fractured. Multiple hairline cracks radiated from a single stress point, the exact location Dr. Thomas Harrison had identified in his engineering reports 2 years earlier. Metallurgical analysis confirmed thermal fatigue and cyclic stress as the failure mechanism. The math was redone. The probability calculations, the mean time before failure. Boeing's calculations had been catastrophically wrong. Actual MTBF, approximately 15 years on high-utilization aircraft. The aircraft that failed, tail number N2784U, had been in service for 14 years and 8 months, accumulating 67,000 flight hours. But what came next shocked even the seasoned investigators. In Boeing's archives, they found Dr. Thomas Harrison's reports. All 6 of them, dated over a 2-year period. Each one clearly identified the lower rudder actuator end cap as a critical failure point. Each one recommended immediate action, either replacing the part with a redesigned version or implementing the emergency workaround procedure. Each one stamped, reviewed, risk accepted, low priority. Then they found the emails. Thomas Harrison pleading with executives to address the issue. Executives dismissing his concerns. Harrison threatening to go public. Legal department warning him about breach of contract and defamation. His final email, "I'm contacting the FAA tomorrow. I can't be part of this anymore." The next day, fatal car accident. The NTSB investigators contacted the Washington State Police and requested the accident report for Thomas Harrison. The report stated brake failure as the cause. The investigators asked to examine the physical evidence. The wrecked car had been stored in an evidence yard, scheduled for destruction in 3 months. Forensic examination of the brake lines revealed something the original investigation had missed. The corrosion pattern was inconsistent with natural degradation. Under electron microscopy, tool marks were visible. Someone had deliberately scored the brake lines to weaken them, then applied a corrosive agent to mask the sabotage. Within 72 hours, 3 Boeing senior executives were placed on administrative leave. The FBI opened a criminal investigation into corporate negligence and potential homicide. The FAA issued an emergency airworthiness directive grounding all Boeing 777s until the lower rudder actuators could be inspected. Dr. Thomas Harrison's death was officially reclassified as suspicious. The media exploded with the story. The press conference was held at Calgary Airport, in a conference room packed with journalists from around the world. Maya Harrison sat at a long table, flanked by Captain Rebecca Torres and NTSB lead investigator Robert Chen. She looked even smaller than usual, wearing the same purple NASA hoodie and jeans from the flight. Someone had offered to get her a more formal outfit, but she'd refused. My dad wouldn't care what I wore. He'd care that I told the truth. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions. Investigator Chen raised his hand for quiet. We'll take questions one at a time. This young woman has been through a traumatic experience. Please be respectful. A reporter from CNN stood. Maya, can you explain how you knew what was wrong with the aircraft? Maya pulled out her father's blueprint and unfolded it on the table for the cameras. My dad designed the 777's hydraulic rudder system. Before he died, he discovered a flaw, a weakness in the lower rudder actuator end cap. He told Boeing about it. He wrote reports. He showed them the calculations. He begged them to fix it. She pointed to the technical drawings on the blueprint. They said the probability of failure was so low it wasn't worth fixing. They calculated 28,000 years before this would happen. But my dad's calculations showed it could happen in 10 to 20 years. How did you know how to fix it? Because after Boeing rejected his safety reports, my dad designed an emergency workaround, a way to isolate the failed component and reroute hydraulic control through the upper rudder. He gave me this blueprint and made me memorize the procedure. He said, someday this might save lives. Her voice cracked. He was right. A reporter from the BBC asked, are you saying Boeing deliberately ignored your father's warnings? Maya's expression hardened. I'm not saying they ignored him. The documents show they ignored him. They dismissed his reports as low priority. They threatened him with legal action when he wanted to go public. And the day before he was supposed to meet with FAA investigators, his brakes mysteriously failed. Murmurs rippled through the press corps. Are you suggesting Boeing had your father killed? I'm suggesting you look at the evidence. Forensic investigators found tool marks on the brake lines. Someone sabotaged his car. Who had a motive to stop him from talking to the FAA? Captain Torres leaned forward. Let me be clear about what happened on my aircraft. A catastrophic failure occurred, a failure that Boeing's own engineer predicted and documented. The emergency procedure that saved my aircraft and 404 lives was not in any official manual because Boeing refused to approve it. And the only person alive who knew how to implement that procedure was this 12-year-old girl. She put her hand on Maya's shoulder. This child has more integrity and courage than the executives who buried her father's warnings. She saved every person on that aircraft. A reporter from the New York Times stood. Maya, what do you want people to know about your father? Maya was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she spoke, and her voice was strong and clear. My dad used to say, every bolt, every wire, every valve, it's not just engineering. It's a promise. A promise that people will get home safe to their families. She held up the blueprint, her father's handwriting visible to every camera. Boeing broke that promise. They silenced my dad when he tried to keep it. They chose profit over safety. They chose stock prices over human lives. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. But my dad's engineering lived on. In this blueprint. In the knowledge he gave me. And today, his promise was kept. 404 people went home safe because my dad loved them enough to protect them, even after he was gone. The room was completely silent except for camera shutters clicking. I'm 12 years old. I draw airplanes on my sneakers. And I saved 404 lives because my dad believed a kid could learn engineering if someone loved them enough to teach them. She looked directly into the cameras. So when people ask me if I'm going to be an engineer like my dad, I tell them, I already am. I've been one since I was 6 years old, standing in a Boeing hangar, learning from the best engineer who ever lived. And I'm going to finish what he started. I'm going to make sure no other engineer gets silenced for trying to keep people safe. I'm going to make sure corporations can't bury safety warnings. I'm going to make sure my dad's promise, that people get home safe, becomes more than just words. That's what my dad would want. That's what the 404 people on Flight 237 deserve. And that's what I'm going to do. The press conference ended to standing ovation. The fallout was swift and devastating for Boeing. Within 1 week, the FBI charged 3 executives with conspiracy to commit corporate manslaughter. Boeing's stock price dropped 28%. The CEO resigned. Lawsuits were filed by passengers, airlines, and Thomas Harrison's estate. Congress announced hearings on corporate safety accountability. Within 1 month, forensic investigators definitively proved Thomas Harrison's car had been sabotaged. 2 former Boeing security contractors were arrested and agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. They named names, including the executives who'd ordered the hit. All 777s worldwide received mandatory modifications to the lower rudder actuator, using Dr. Harrison's original redesign recommendations. The emergency workaround procedure was officially adopted and named the Harrison Protocol. Within 6 months, the 3 executives were convicted and sentenced to prison. 2 accessories to murder received 15-year sentences. Boeing paid a $2.4 billion settlement, $800 million to Maya Harrison's trust, $1.6 billion distributed among Flight 237 passengers and other affected parties. Dr. Thomas Harrison was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Congress passed the Harrison Safety Act requiring mandatory reporting of all engineering safety concerns to independent oversight boards. And Maya Harrison, age 13, was invited to testify before Congress. The Senate hearing room was packed. Maya sat at the witness table, tiny in the oversized chair, wearing a simple dress her mother had bought for the occasion. Beside her sat Captain Torres and First Officer Kim, there to support her. Senator Patricia Whitmore of California, chair of the committee, opened the hearing. We're here today because a 12-year-old girl saved 404 lives using knowledge her father gave her before he was murdered for trying to protect public safety. That sentence should horrify every American. She looked at Maya. Ms. Harrison, thank you for being here. We know this is difficult. Please, in your own words, tell us what happened. Maya took a breath and began. She told them about her father, the brilliant engineer who loved airplanes and loved teaching his daughter. She told them about the flaw he discovered and the reports he filed. She told them about Boeing's rejections, their risk calculations, their refusal to act. She told them about his final email to the FAA and his death the next day. She told them about Flight 237, the lurch, the fear, the cockpit, the repair. She told them everything. When she finished, she pulled out her father's blueprint one more time and laid it on the table. This blueprint saved 404 lives. My dad drew it knowing Boeing would never approve it. He gave it to me knowing he might not survive long enough to use it himself. Her voice strengthened. But here's what Congress needs to understand, my dad shouldn't have needed to create a secret workaround. Boeing should have fixed the flaw when he first reported it. And my dad should still be alive. She looked at each senator in turn. Corporations are making life and death decisions about safety based on profit calculations. They're deciding that some failures are acceptable because the probability is low. They're deciding that some deaths are acceptable because fixing the problem costs too much. My dad refused to accept that math. He said every life matters. Every safety concern matters. And he paid for that belief with his life. So I'm asking Congress to change the system. Make it illegal for corporations to suppress engineering safety reports. Create independent oversight that engineers can report to without fear of retaliation. Make executives personally liable for safety decisions, not just the corporation, but the actual people making the decisions. Senator Whitmore leaned forward. What would you say to young people who might want to become engineers? Maya smiled for the first time. I'd say do it. We need more engineers who care about people more than profit. We need more engineers willing to stand up and say, this isn't safe even when it's unpopular. Engineering isn't just about building things. It's about keeping promises. Promises to the people who trust their lives to our designs, promises to the families waiting for their loved ones to come home. My dad kept that promise, even after he died. And if I can do the same, if I can become even half the engineer he was, then maybe his death will mean something. Maybe no other kid will have to save a plane using a secret blueprint their murdered father gave them. The hearing room erupted in applause. Senator Whitmore wiped tears from her eyes. Ms. Harrison, your father would be extraordinarily proud of the young woman you've become. 1 year after Flight 237, Maya Harrison stood in the Aerospace Engineering building at MIT. She was 14 now, visiting the campus as part of a special program for gifted students. MIT had already offered her early admission, she could start college at 16 if she wanted. The hallways were lined with photographs of famous engineers and historic aircraft. Students rushed between classes carrying armfuls of textbooks. Maya walked slowly, taking it all in. Then she stopped. On the wall was a large memorial photograph, Dr. Thomas Harrison, Boeing Chief Hydraulic Systems Engineer, in memoriam. His courage saved lives. His legacy inspires engineers. Below the photo was a plaque, the Harrison Safety Prize, awarded annually to the engineering student who demonstrates exceptional commitment to public safety over corporate interests. A professor noticed her staring and approached. You're Maya Harrison, aren't you? Yes, sir. I'm Professor David Martinez. I teach aerospace systems design. Your father's Rudder system is part of my curriculum now. Every student in my program studies what happened, the technical failure, yes, but also the ethical failure. How engineers have a duty to speak up, even when it's difficult. He'd like that, Maya said quietly. Will you study here? MIT would be honored to have you. Maya thought about her future. She thought about her father's blueprint, now displayed in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. She thought about the 404 people from Flight 237 who went home to their families because her father had prepared her for the worst. Yes, she said. I'll study here. And then I'm going to design aircraft systems that don't have hidden flaws. Systems that are transparent. Systems where safety concerns can't be buried. Following in your father's footsteps. No, Maya said firmly. I'm finishing what he started. There's a difference. She looked up at her father's photograph. He laid the foundation. He showed me the way. He gave me the tools. But the building is mine to complete. And what kind of building will it be? Maya smiled. One where every engineer knows that profit should never, ever come before safety. One where whistleblowers are protected, not murdered. One where a 12-year-old girl never has to save a plane because her father's warnings were ignored. That's ambitious. My dad always said, if you're not aiming high enough to fail, you're not aiming high enough to matter. Professor Martinez extended his hand. Welcome to MIT, Ms. Harrison. We'll help you build that future. Maya shook his hand. Thank you. But I won't be doing it alone. My dad taught me that engineering is teamwork. Safety is teamwork. Changing the world is teamwork. She pulled out a worn notebook from her backpack, the same one she'd carried on Flight 237. I've been keeping a list of engineers who contacted me after the incident. Hundreds of them, from airlines and manufacturers all over the world. They all have stories like my dad's, safety concerns that were dismissed, reports that were buried, fears of retaliation. We're going to change that. Together. 5 years after United Flight 237, Maya Harrison stood in a Boeing hangar, the same hangar where her father had taught her to love airplanes. She was 19 years old now. A sophomore at MIT with a perfect 4.0 GPA and 3 published papers on hydraulic safety systems. She'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine, the teen who changed aviation safety. But today, she wasn't here as a student or a celebrity. She was here as a Boeing consultant, hired to conduct independent safety reviews of all new aircraft designs. The irony wasn't lost on her. A young Boeing engineer, fresh out of college, probably 23 years old, approached nervously, carrying a rolled blueprint. Ms. Harrison. I'm sorry to bother you, but I found something in the fuel control system design for the new 787-10. A potential weak point in the pressure regulator. I showed it to my supervisor, and he said the probability of failure is too low to worry about, less than 0.001% over the aircraft's lifetime. Maya's expression didn't change, but inside, her heart raced. This was it. The test, the moment that would show whether anything had really changed. What's your name? She asked. James Chen. James, show me what you found. He unrolled the blueprint on a work table. Maya studied it carefully, her trained eyes scanning the technical details. There, in the pressure regulator coupling. A stress concentration point that could lead to fatigue cracking under thermal cycling. Not likely. But possible. And possible was unacceptable. Your supervisor is wrong, Maya said firmly. Probability doesn't matter when lives are at stake. If there's a potential failure mode, we address it. Period. James looked relieved. That's what I thought, but I'm new here, and I didn't want to. James, listen to me. You did exactly the right thing. Never, ever let anyone tell you a safety concern is too unlikely to matter. She pulled out her phone and called Boeing's current chief safety officer, a position that hadn't existed before Flight 237. This is Maya Harrison. I have an engineer here who's identified a potential safety issue in the 787-10 fuel system. I want a full engineering review initiated immediately, and I want James Chen's concerns formally documented and addressed. A pause. Yes, I understand it might delay production. I don't care. You will address this concern, or I will personally present it to the FAA and the media. Your choice. Another pause. Good. Send the review team here within the hour. She hung up and looked at James. You're going to get a lot of pressure to back down, to say you were mistaken, to accept the risk calculation. Don't. Stand firm. The truth matters more than the production schedule. But what if they fire me? Maya smiled. Then you'll have a job offer from Harrison Safety Consulting before you finish cleaning out your desk. I hire engineers with integrity. James's eyes widened. You'd hire me? In a heartbeat. The world needs engineers who care more about people than profits. Engineers like you. Engineers like my father. She handed him a business card. But you won't get fired. The Harrison Safety Act protects whistleblowers. And Boeing knows that if they retaliate against you, they'll answer to me, to Congress, and to every aviation safety board in the world. Because of what happened to your father. Because of what happened to my father, Maya confirmed. He died so that engineers like you would be protected. So that safety concerns like yours wouldn't be buried. She looked around the hangar, at the massive aircraft being assembled, at the hundreds of workers, at the complexity and beauty of modern aviation engineering. This is what my dad loved. Building machines that lift people into the sky and bring them home safe. Every bolt, every wire, every valve, it's all a promise. She turned back to James. Your job, my job, every engineer's job, is to keep that promise. No matter what. No matter the cost. No matter the pressure. Because somewhere out there, right now, 400 people are boarding an aircraft that they're trusting us. They're trusting that engineers like you and me did our jobs right. That we didn't cut corners, that we didn't ignore warnings. That we kept our promise. Maya walked to the window and looked out at the Seattle skyline. My father kept that promise. He paid for it with his life. But because of him, 404 people went home safe. Because of him, you and I are standing here, having this conversation, knowing that safety matters more than schedules. She touched the window glass, remembering. And someday, when I have a daughter, I'm going to bring her to a hangar just like this one. I'm going to show her airplanes and teach her engineering. And I'm going to tell her about her grandfather, the man she never met, but whose courage changed the world. I'm going to tell her that engineering isn't about machines. It's about promises. And Harrisons keep their promises. Maya turned back to James. So write your report, James. Document everything. And know that when you submit it, you're not just fixing a potential flaw. You're keeping a promise to 400 people you'll never meet. People who will board that aircraft someday, trusting that engineers like us did our jobs right. That's the promise my father made. That's the promise I make every day. And now it's your promise too. James stood straighter. I won't let you down. I won't let them down. I know you won't. Because you're the kind of engineer the world needs. As Maya walked out of the hangar into the Seattle sunshine, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Peace. Her father's promise, the promise that had cost him everything, lived on. In her.in engineers like James.in the Harrison Safety Act. In the thousands of lives that would never know how close they came to disaster, saved by engineers who chose courage over convenience. She pulled out her phone and opened a photo, her father, smiling in a Boeing hangar, wearing his Boeing jacket and holding a blueprint. We did it, Dad, she whispered. Your promise lives on. And I'm going to make sure it never dies. Somewhere above her, a Boeing 777 climbed into the sky, its passengers safe, its systems sound, its promise kept. And Maya Harrison smiled. Because that's what Harrisons do. They build things that bring people home.